Hi everyone, and welcome to my Season 4 feedback. So the PTR is over. We have been playing the new season for around a week, and now I have finally sat down and gathered my thoughts about the stuff that I think should be improved, that can change, that is overpowered, underpowered, and so on. So I have prepared a pretty big document for that, and I've also already passed this on to Blizzard. I have like nearly 7 pages to go through here, and I will try to keep it as short as possible. I want to say at the start that I think that Season 4 looks amazing, and I think a lot of players will really enjoy coming back to the game. I would rate it just like a 9 out of 10 probably. So despite me mostly having a lot of negative points and stuff that I want to see changed in this feedback and that I'm going through here, my overall impression of the reworks are amazing. So I like the Helltide changes, I like the item changes, I like the tempering, the masterworking. You know, the general idea of all of these systems is very good. There are definitely details that should change for, quality of life reasons. There are builds that are completely busted that need to be changed because they are literally game breaking and or make your PC explode or other people's PCs explode. So there is stuff like that, and stuff has to change a little bit. But in a grand scheme of things, I am very positive about this patch. I think a lot of people enjoy this, the casuals and the blasters alike. A lot of people are saying stuff like, Diablo 4 is finally out of beta. This is finally, the way that the game should have released, these kind of things. And well, this is definitely what it feels like. So in general, the mood is very positive. Everyone who played PTR and now no longer has access to the PTR has like this, post PTR blues and just waits for the new season basically, because it's just that cool. So with that out of the way, I want to go into my feedback and talk about the stuff that, I think is good and mostly the stuff that should change. And while we're on the topic of Diablo 4, do you sometimes have issues with your latency and your game connection? Personally, I live in Bulgaria and I'm very far away from the Central European servers that I usually get connected to. Those that watch me on stream regularly will know that whenever I play the game, I usually have a pretty high latency of around the 90 to 100 ms range because of where I live. But there's a solution to that, the GearUP Booster. You can use this software to boost your connection and always use the best line available to the nearest server and have a faster ping. I tried it out myself for a little bit and it really seems to make an impact. But not only does it improve the latency for your connection, it can also prevent you from disconnecting altogether. Especially when you're playing a lot of hardcore in Diablo 4 like me, this is definitely a huge boon. With the GearUP Booster, you can choose to either auto-assign yourself to the best available server, or you can also choose which server you want to connect to. And for example, in Diablo 4, this is also a pretty great benefit, because as I mentioned, I live in the far end of Europe, and there's not really many people when I go around the world of Sanctuary. But if I connect to a more Central European server, there will be a lot more people to find in the open world for events and so on. Or alternatively, you can do the reverse and just switch to a less crowded area if you like the solitude. This software can be used in thousands of different games. All the big titles are there, so it's not just Diablo 4. And the great perk of the GearUP Booster is it's extremely simple to use. All it takes is the click of a button after launching the software, and it will automatically do everything for you. You just log into the game and that's it. If you want to check out the GearUP Booster yourself, then go check out the link in the description or the pinned comment below. They offer a free trial and juicy new user discounts. I want to thank GearUP very much for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to our topic. So let's get into this feedback here. So the good, as I mentioned, I'm generally positive about pretty much everything that I've put in there. So I really like the Helltide. If you liked Season 2 with the Blood Harvest, Helltide is basically exactly that, just even more on crack. There's a lot of stuff happening all the time. It feels pretty amazing, and this is actually exactly what I wanted and expected them to do after Season 2. For some reason it didn't make it into Season 3, but here we are. So Helltide is there, that's amazing. They also, for example, did some little things like in dungeons, now you can interact with objects like much faster. It's like 0.75 seconds. In general, there seem to be like a few things that I've missed, like some lever clicks or something. But in the grand scheme of things, like these Nightmare Dungeon objectives are also like way less annoying. So that's kind of cool. There's going to be glyph XP buffs that we did not test on the PTR, but I expect if they actually mention that, there should be at least 20% or more, maybe more. And that will also make it so that you can potentially boost like a glyph in less than an hour all the way to 21, for example, in the future, So that's kind of cool. Build diversity and customization is going way up. We already had relatively good build diversity, at least for people that were also accepting something like B tier builds or so. The build diversity in the game was relatively good in my opinion compared to other builds, other games, but it's just, you know, going through the roof now, because you can now, you know, actually really customize your build. You can put like specific stats to proc certain things on your build. It allows you to change some aspects around. You have like, you know, more options to make certain skills really powerful and like, you know, hypercharged, and like caltrops can like hit the entire screen if you want to, and now you can suddenly use caltrops and play around those and these kind of things. So there is really cool stuff in there that a lot of people will probably enjoy playing around with. Even if you like to play like the same build season after season, for example, you can just do it in like, you know, a tweaked fashion, and, you know, just do something else as like, you know, 2 or 3 supporting skills in your setup, and, you know, kind of like how the setup comes together. Then we have a lot of cool new uniques and builds. So there's like stuff like the Frozen Orb. I mean, Frozen Orb is not a new build, but the way that the new Frozen Orb plays is completely new, with conjurations, with the new amulet, for example. Firebolt Sork is a thing. There's other stuff out there as well, like, you know, grenade rogues are kind of a thing now, for example. So lots of cool stuff there. There's also like going to be a self-cast landslide druid, for example, with the new unique ring. So they actually gave you the option to either play trample slide or a self-cast version, so that's kind of cool as well. Yeah, then I like the new Uber bosses. So there is going to be level 200 versions of all of the bosses, and I've tried them. I fought them with like a non-Omega blaster build for bosses basically, and when you actually fight these bosses, they are really cool encounters. Especially like the new Andariel fight, but most of them actually feel pretty amazing because they have kind of like a danger and a threatening mechanics. Some of them, I'm gonna go into details, can also be tuned up a bit because they're just too easy, but they are pretty tanky. They do hurt, especially when you start getting a few of those stacks that give you extra damage taken, which you can get from various mechanics in those fights. And in general, it's gonna be like a cool challenge to just take like any build that you make and then, you know, go all the way, you know, equip them, gear them up, go masterwork your items, and then eventually go fight those Uber bosses with any build. So that will be very fun, I believe. And then we have also like a lot of other like nice quality of life changes and just like easier farming of boss materials. For example, you can now do events in dungeons. They're actually good XP while leveling up. They can sometimes drop boss materials. You get like random living steals here, random Bashan mods there. This kind of feels good. We also have 925 loot everywhere, which is amazing because you don't have to look at the item power anymore. This also includes gambling, I think, although there were some small bugs. And yeah, basically, in general, really good patch that we are looking at here. Now, let's talk about the rest of this document. So we have the bad here, we have the ugly. So this is kind of the same stuff, but this is more important, I think. But, you know, there's a lot of stuff that I would like to see changed. And then I have like some specific feedback for the pit. It's like the new graded rift-like system, the tormented bosses, the tempering, which is one of the crafting methods, then the masterworking, which is the other one, and new uniques in general, and so on, and some bugs and some wish lists down here. And then also builds that I think should be buffed and nerfed. So let's get into it. Now, for the bad, one thing that we really noticed was the whale crystal cost. Yeah, especially in printing items was extremely costly. And also these days, you're not going to get a lot of yellow items anymore to just salvage into whale crystals. So that needs to be addressed a little bit. Like a lot of people said the same things here. I think that the gem reworks are pretty poor. So they have changed the stats that they gain from gems that they socket in armor, weapon, and so on. And yeah, the only ones that really matter are rubies in armor for the life. And that's it in armor. And then weapon gems still don't matter at all. And then you have like the resistances that are pretty important in the jewelry. So that is kind of bad. And I think long term there could be like more tweaks so that it's actually a bit of more interesting choices to make here. Then there is going to be some extra Helltide monster level elixir. I've actually personally not gotten one of these. Apparently it raises the monster level by like 10, which is kind of cool. So in general, Helltide is, you know, very low end content, very easy content. And you can even do it from level 1 these days with World Tier 1 and World Tier 2 Helltides. So that's going to be like the new leveling meta most likely. But later game, you're going to have a very, very powerful character. So the way that this works is that now you're going to level to 100 relatively fast, and then the game actually starts. So this is kind of like, you know, similar to like, you know, Diablo 3 a little bit. It's not like as fast to level to 100 like in Diablo 3 to 70, But you know, the game kind of really begins at that point, because then you start farming the pit, then you start really tempering your items, then you get those crazy uniques and so on. So there's a lot more like a tail end progression path. And the effect of that is that basically everything that is like outdoor content becomes extremely trivial really fast. So, you know, for example, previously you leveled to 100 and then maybe your character got like twice as strong after level 100 from farming better gear. But now you're going to level to 100 and your character is going to get like 10 times as strong from gearing up. So basically everything that is like designed for leveling is going to be trivial. And that includes Helltide, that includes Whispers. And there is this Helltide elixir that raises the level. Ultimately, it seems to be extremely rare, so you probably won't even get it very easily. But also, even if it does raise the level by like 10 or something, that's not enough. And we kind of need a world tier 5. So I have to like somewhere down there, and like the wish list as well. I think a world tier 5 like should have happened with this patch, where like a fully geared like level 100 character can go that, and like, everything is like tier 100 9 dungeons basically, like, you know, all the outdoor content. And it doesn't need to have like new types of items or something crazy to get. It's totally fine if that has the same rewards, just maybe a bit more efficient. You know, you get like 25% more gold and materials and whatever, you know, maybe a bit more chances for greater affix drops and so on. So that would have been cool. And I guess this is kind of like a pseudo world tier 5 thing now with this elixir. But ultimately, I would like to have that. And at the very least, I would like to see this thing more often, because I actually tried to farm one and I couldn't even get one. So that's a bit sad. Some other small stuff here. Helltide Worm spawns too often. I would like to see this less often, but maybe more stuff or some cool stuff like a goblin, or someone in my chat suggested the butcher spawning there. That would be kind of fun. Gem fragments, I see that as a problem. A lot of people didn't notice this on the PTR, I think, but we will absolutely hit the cap on gem fragments with the current design. So numbers need to change a little bit here, else it's going to be very annoying. In general, the game is becoming easier and easier. So I already mentioned this with like the power creep basically, and you know, the new items, and you know, the power curve at level 100, kind of trivializing everything, including all the way to like T100 9 dungeons. They're going to be trivial for a lot of builds in the future. At least if you're not playing like a super terrible build and you have some kind of gear, then T100 9 dungeons are going to be no big deal. And yeah, the real difficulty is going to be the tournament bosses and the pit. And that is okay. I think it's fine that generally the game is somewhat easy, but we are missing, you know, opportunities for blasters to actually use the easiness of the game to their advantage in any way. So that's basically what I'm talking about here. For example, stuff like going to World Tier 3, going to World Tier 4, like very, very early, very underleveled. Those are like kind of like the only opportunities that you can use to try to, you know, convert your, you know, skill at the game into efficiency. And there's not really all too much other efficiency to be gained. And in general, the game is just kind of like, you know, you blast down entire screens of monsters now. So I would like to see a bit more opportunities there in the future, kind of like a wishlist thing, I guess. But yeah, the only really challenging stuff are like tormented bosses, and people will absolutely make cheesy builds for those. And then we have like the high level pit, but the pit doesn't go far enough to be really challenging on the high end either. So it's kind of like a strange scenario where they tried to make like some really high end content to satisfy the blasters, and they have just failed, honestly. So this is basically where we're at. So we need like, you know, more high-end stuff that, you know, kind of like has, you know, infinite difficulty in the pit, for example. Or we also need, you know, just a bigger challenge of those tournament bosses, because some of them are a joke. And we also just need, along the way, on the way there, you know, some other opportunities for blasters to kind of like, you know, play differently, basically. But okay. Then we have some other little problems here. Character sheet doesn't have all of the tooltips or like the stats. Tooltips are wrong. It's like a general problem. I just put it here just to remind them. We don't have a separate inventory for sigils and elixirs and boss mats. That is kind of annoying, to be honest. Like, we had the legendary aspects inventory, and that is just deleted now, because aspects are now just directly in the codex and there's not an item anymore. That was fine. But why didn't we get an extra inventory for elixirs or something, or an extra inventory for sigils? Like, the fact that all of the stuff is like mixed into the same inventory is completely annoying and unnecessary, in my opinion. Visual clarity took a big hit in this patch as well. Like, we have a lot of builds that spawn tons of projectiles. I talked about Frozen Orb. There's like 20 Frozen Orbs on the ground at the same time when you play Frozen Orb build in the end game. The biggest offender here was the Dust Devil stuff, but I already expect that to get heavy nerfs anyway. But yeah, literally when a barb was there with Dust Devils, my CPU fans would go crazy. I would not see anything on my screen. Like, no chance I would even see my character or the enemy. So this is how crazy that was, because there was just 100 Dust Devils on the screen and they were massive and just blocked everything. So in general, this is something that they have to work on. I think it's cool that we're gonna get stuff like, you can spawn, double projectiles and you have really high attack speed, and it feels fun to do that stuff. But on the other hand, there needs to be kind of a system in place that actually makes the game playable still. So something like, dynamic, culling of effects, dynamic, tuning down of, the opacity, for example, of these effects, so that I can actually still see the ground and I can still see the enemies and these kind of things. So something needs to happen here. It's cool to have all this crazy stuff in the game. It's not cool that the game becomes unplayable. So yeah. Random thing here, Kickstarf kind of feels like completely out of place these days. Like, just like the one thing in Helltide that I really hate. Like, Kickstarf is just annoying with the days all the time. He doesn't really do any damage. He says like his name is like the Helltide Assassin or something, but he tickles you. I think this guy needs like 5 times higher damage at least, and maybe move the days, and then it's kind of like a cool boss fight. And also there's like some kind of like exploits, I guess, with Helltides. There's like a new Helltide meter that fills up as you progress, and then after killing X enemies, you kind of like spawn a horde of enemies. It's like a gauntlet basically. There's like enemies spawning in on you for a while. And if you do this with like 5 people, 10 people or something in the same spot, you can kind of like continuously farm the same spawns from other people and then fill your meter while they're spawning theirs. And it's kind of like an infinite cycle. So something needs to be done there, I think, because it's completely broken. All right, now let's get into the ugly. So we talked about the bad stuff. Now let's talk about the ugly stuff. So, I mean, some of the stuff I already mentioned, like the visual clarity. But yeah, there's also stuff that kind of just breaks the game. So, for example, infinite flame shield. And also blood mist to some degree. There is affixes now, for example, like flame shield duration. And there's effects like, hectic. There is other effects that can reset your cooldowns. And you can basically get like some 6 seconds or 8 seconds flame shields, and you can easily reset it. Like, there were actually many different builds on the PTR that all kind of like revolved around just left clicking and having perma flame shield. So that stuff should obviously not exist if you want to have any kind of reasonable challenge in the game. Perma flame shield needs to go. Perma blood mist probably also needs to go. And in D3, for example, this was a problem way back. If you remember the yes woo from my streams. That was in season 1, for example, the Ball Lightning Demon Hunter that I made, which was exactly the same principle way, just perma invincible. And that will patch pretty soon after. And I think it is time to do that now as well in Diablo 4. Like, cooldowns cannot recover while they're active for immunity skills. That's just how the game has to work in order for this to function at all. Then we have one thing that is really bad. A lot of people were moaning about this, is enchanting on the occultist. So if you enchant items at the occultist, you have a huge weight towards more common affixes now. And this is very noticeable. Like, it's very hard to roll a cooldown. It's very hard to roll like a certain skill, extra ranks on your glove or whatever. There are some things that are really rare now. There's also a lot of other things that are like really common, like life shows up all the time, main stat shows up all the time, and so on. So a few things like that. But I think what is actually happening here is they have the same weight for affixes that can drop on the item and that can be enchanted on the item. And I think that should be the reverse. I think that dropped items, with the spirit of generally being useful, should have a higher weight towards those universal stats like life and main stats. But then it would be cool if you can go to your occultist and the weights are reversed. Like, I don't want to roll life for my items most of the time. I want to roll away from it most of the time. And then try to get like my, extra rapid fire ranks on the glove or something. So it would be cool if like the occultist is like the option to like take one of those stats and make it more like specific to the build, because that is kind of like the overall theme of this entire itemization rework, I feel, where, well, you find good bases very often and then you can customize them. So at least at the very minimum, I think the weighting on enchanting needs to go completely, or it should be in favor of the more rare stuff that you usually don't get from drops. So that's like my opinion here. Also, while we are on the topic of enchanting, no change needs to absolutely be the default option. We're enchanting a lot more now. It's not like in season 3 or so where you enchant 10 times and the item is gone. but you can actually roll an item many times now because they kept the gold cost. It is still kind of costly, but it's not like impossible. And if you don't have no change as default, you can just do a misclick and then it changes your stat that you already rolled. So that's, you know, kind of stupid. So no change is always the default choice anyway. So why is this not already, you know, selected? Then we have blue glyphs. I keep mentioning them every time, but blue glyphs should just not exist in the current state. Like I think the game would just be better if they were just deleted. Dust Devils, I talked about these. Then there's the elemental surge affix. So there is a temper mod on weapons that you can put that says something like lucky hit, chance to deal like 40,000 damage or something like that. And this is completely correct. Like this thing alone is completely game breaking and either needs like a massive nerf, like at least 80%, I think. It's fine that you can put it on like twink items and stuff and you're kind of powerful, but there are other options there as well to just make your twinks completely crazy. So twinking out your character is actually a thing in the future as well for your alts. But Elemental Surge also kind of like broke my main builds. So for example, I was playing a Twisting Blades rogue with poison, like completely scaling dot damage and all that good stuff. And then I put Elemental Surge on my weapons because that was kind of like the only option that did more than nothing. And then Elemental Surge, just like my puncture with Elemental Surge started like two-shotting elites in like the highest content in the game, basically. So that was a terrible experience because why am I even trying to make a build? And in that case, I think that's just straight up would be better if this was deleted so that it doesn't come back with some other builds that have like crazy lucky hit synergies or so. Like, you know, the example that I played is far from the best use case of Elemental Surge. There are definitely way crazier lucky hit builds out there that can really abuse this. And yeah, I would rather just see like more interesting stuff and not like a left click build that just kind of decimates the entire game. Then we have the solo versus group gap. I talked about this in other feedback videos as well in the past. Season 2 brought this to the game and it has not been changed since. We have boss rotations. We have kind of like this mandatory grouping of farming the bosses, and it's going to get much worse in the future. I talked about the tormented bosses being like a cool milestone, a cool challenge, something that, you know, I think a lot of people try to work towards to try to challenge themselves, take them down with their build. And it's going to be very fun to do that. But the thing is, they cost a lot of materials. And, you know, there's not really a special reward for doing that outside of like getting this one spark for the first kill. So it's kind of like mostly for fun and mostly for the challenge. And this is really what I like about them. So they are kind of like, you know, either a time save if you're like really fast at killing them, or they're just like for fun, basically for sports. But the problem is that right now, if you do that, then you're gonna pay like, you know, 5 times the cost. This is what the cost is of these bosses. You get 5 times the loot, fine. But you could have gotten 20 times the loot by just doing a group rotation, because, you know, you can do the group rotations, everyone brings their materials, everyone does 5 summons, you bring your 5 summons, you get 20 summons worth of drops from other people as well, summoning their own 5. And if you do this, well, you're going to lose out on 15 boss kills, basically, every time you try to kill a tormented boss solo. And that's a terrible experience. So this group versus solo gap needs to shrink. They have actually tried doing that a little bit. For example, in the Helltide on the Blood Maiden encounter, it's like a new Helltide boss that works a bit like this Blood Harvest. You know, add 50 blood to the event for the Blood Harvest and then spawn a bunch of monsters. So it's kind of similar. But those people that contribute on this and summon actually get extra loot on the Blood Maiden kill. And similar in the pit, for example, there is like a bunch of materials dropping, and those materials are split between the party members, with the guy opening getting the most. In the pit, this is actually the opposite. It's like actually bad for groups because it's the same number of materials. It doesn't actually raise at all. So you actually just waste time doing it in a group. So that's like the opposite extreme. But in the bossing is like you just multiply all of your materials by ×4. And the hard part about the bosses is not doing the boss, it's farming the materials. So there's basically never a point where you want to do them solo, basically. So I would like to see a bit of a change here. For example, I think it's fine that group play is a bit more efficient, but it should be 4 times more efficient. So if, for example, leechers only get 25% of the loot, and then, you know, the guy opening and summoning the boss gets 100%, I think that would be totally acceptable. You know, it's still like a total of 175% of loot, basically, with 4 people instead of 400%. And I think that is like, you know, somewhat more acceptable, because there's also obviously the cost of just being there for the boss kill, you know, spending your time on that kill. So I think it's fine that people that are leeching are getting rewarded a little bit compared to the guy opening. But the way that it works right now is just really disheartening for people that generally play solo, like myself and many other people that complain about this. And especially if Tormented bosses working the way they are, being kind of this milestone, this challenge in the future, this will feel terrible. So yeah, I hope that something will change here very soon. Anyway, let's move on. We have world bosses. They are still a meme. They're even more of a meme in the future. So I would like to see either some huge bump up for them or something like Tormented world bosses where they have like a level 200 version and it's actually some incredible fight. Now it could be badass as well. We still have infinite XP share range in parties, so you can like, you know, leech in party in like a dungeon. You can just stand in the entrance and just like get infinite XP basically. The same thing with like boosting people and all that stuff. So I don't think this should exist. There's also like, you know, split farming strats in dungeons that just makes party play significantly better than solo play for leveling and so on. I think this doesn't need to be the case. Like, why is this not like in any other game, literally, where you have like, you know, a few screens radius and this is where you get XP and loot and that's it. So at least you can actually play together in a party instead of going in a party and then splitting up in different corners of the dungeon where you don't actually play together. So that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, some other kind of weird stuff like Incinerate is like the best played when you just spam the button. It's like general skill, but you want to spam it because you can like proc lucky hits more often, you can proc Frozen Orb Enchantment more often, so that's like some stuff like that. Helltide chests, I like the new Helltides, but the chests were not really changed, and it's still mostly you go for the Living Seal chest and that's it, because Living Seal is still the most relevant. You want to farm Duriel Mats and so on. I would prefer if the Living Seal chest just didn't exist and all of the other chests just kind of like scaled their Living Steel. Like 75 gives like, you know, 1 steel, and then maybe 125 chest gives like, you know, 1.5 steals on average, or, you know, the 250 chest gives like, I don't know, 4 steals on average or something like that. I think that would be way better and would actually give Helltide its original purpose of target farming items a little bit back, because you never really want to open anything but the Living Steel chest, and this remains true. One other thing that I found also somewhat annoying is also with Grim Favors cap being only like 14 basically. You constantly teleport around. This is already a major issue in Season 3, where when you have very efficient pathing with the Whispers, you just teleport more than you actually play the game. I think Grim Favor cap should be raised to like at least 30 or something, so we can do multiple turn-ins maybe. That would be cool. One thing I didn't like for Rogue specifically was the new Scoundrel's Kiss Ring, which makes Rapid Fire into like a melee build. Basically, you have to shotgun enemies with that and like play point blank. And a lot of Rogue builds are already melee directly or indirectly, like Barrage. And it's just another one of those cases. It's just a better Barrage, basically. I think it would be cool if like Rapid Fire stays a viable option without the ring. For example, by removing the damage part of it. And also making this ring like ranged viable by, for example, making it shoot in the same place every time. Right now it kind of like spreads out the further away you are from the target, and that makes it kind of unusable at range. So if that was kind of like, you know, it lobs the projectiles, but they explode in the same spot wherever you click, that will be much better. Then we have lots of visual clutter. I talked about this, okay. Attack speed values. So that is a thing that, well, a lot of people disagree with me. But I think that attack speed is like getting too far out of control. So you can basically roll attack speed values like insanely high on all of your gear. In fact, when you created a character and boosted it on the PTR, you could sometimes end up with attack speed cap, just straight up equipped on your items. Like, this is how crazy it was. In case you don't know, there is a 100% attack speed cap for your gear. There's a separate 100% attack speed cap. So the total is 200% bonus. And you're getting really close to that already just from gear very easily. In fact, the maximum you can have on a two-handed weapon is something like 80% or something like that. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, so you can get like 30% baseline roll, and then you can multiply this by times 2.7 with Masterworking and the greater affix, and you get almost the entire attack speed cap from a single item when you have a two-handed weapon, if you go all in on it. And I think that is just way too crazy. Like, attack speed is just generally the most valuable stat to put on most builds, because not only does it give you extra DPS, it also does give you more extra DPS than other options like crit, etc. The numbers are just like so much in favor of attack speed. And also in Season 4 onwards, we're gonna have a very easy time managing our resources. There's a lot of extra resource generation, regeneration. Like, it's not a problem to have a lot of attack speed. it's not a downside in terms of like trying to manage other problems at the same time, for example, anymore. So attack speed just kind of like goes through the roof, and it's always like the best option pretty much. So it's just kind of like needs a bit of a tweaking here, maybe like a minus 50%, maybe minus 33% or so. So it's not like the ultimate like #1 choice on every single item. And also like it kind of like devalues a lot of other attack speed effects. There's like, you know, paragon effects, for example, on the barb, they have like this paragon node for extra attack speed. There is a accelerating aspect, there's a rapid aspect, and all these things are getting massively devalued as well. Because if you want to build into attack speed, you can do that in the game right now already. But right this, like everyone has insane attack speed. And it also makes some things kind of feel a bit silly. Like upheaval with like 150% extra attack speed, it just kind of feels very strange, to be honest. So yeah. And lastly, while we are at this point as well, like decimal values on stats and aspects are completely missing in most cases. Like there are a lot of attacks and like a lot of like missing decimals that just don't really show you the true picture of like how much you're actually getting from a certain effect. That should also change. Now let's talk about the pit. So the pit is relatively cool, and I think kind of like generally a step up from what we had in the game. It's kind of like an end game system. They basically took Diablo 3 Great and put them there, but they gave it some cool tweaks. For example, the boss fights are really amazing, I think, where you fight a boss that's like a regular dungeon boss. Tomb Lord is back, guys, but during that boss fight, there will be up to 3 shadow bosses coming in and doing like individual like AoE attacks that you have to dodge. And those guys actually hurt because those shadow bosses, they cannot be affected by damage reduction effects, you know, damage reduction from poisoned enemies, damage reduction from burning enemies, whatever. So they are kind of like hitting like a truck unless you have like a lot of damage reduction on your character, like a challenging shout, Barbs Rejoice. So in general, that's kind of cool. It makes these boss fights pretty exciting, but some of them are pretty overtuned. In particular, Thieving Hive Master, there's like the fly boss. He spawns like some like moving circular patterns that slow you, and this makes it almost impossible to dodge other stuff. So this is like, you know, this is fine for like a dungeon boss. It's not fine for a pit boss. So this needs to be tuned a little bit. Also, some of these shadow bosses are very imbalanced. The Tomb Lord is a fucking joke. Then we have the tornadoes that are ridiculous. So especially if you play a melee build, like these tornadoes that go after you and they one-shot you basically on most builds. You can try to not get one-shot, but ultimately you don't want to tank them no matter what on the higher tiers, and they kind of like follow you around while the boss follows you around. So they're kind of like always on top of the boss, and sometimes I'm just running circles for like a minute, because by the time that these tornadoes despawn, the next tornado spawn again, and they always spawn in the middle and then they go after you, and you can't really kite them properly. So there are some solutions here. You can make them faster and then slow down, or you could make them go randomly instead of chase the player, or just a way longer cooldown or shorter duration, something like that. But tornadoes are really bad. Like they can be the difference between like you know, 30-second boss kill and a 3-minute boss kill, basically, those tornadoes alone. And then also like this is a human inquisitor boss or something. I thought it looks like Elias, but either way, they shoot like some shadow projectiles and then they circle around the character, and then after like a few seconds they shoot towards the character, and you have to kind of like dodge them on the part 2 of that trajectory, basically. But the problem is that sometimes if you're far away from the boss, they would just like one-shot you on the way to you, because it would go straight through you and then attach to your character on the opposite side, kind of like that. And that definitely needs some tweaking here. But otherwise, I think most of the shadow bosses and normal boss fights are kind of cool. There are obviously harder and easier combinations, and I think that's okay. One thing I really didn't like is that you can just carry a Blaster Shrine or a Artillery Shrine into the boss room and just one-shot the boss. I think the shrine should just be cleansed. But other than that, it was kind of cool to try to go high in the pit. In general, though, I think the pit needs to scale a lot higher. So currently, pit T100 is kind of like the maximum in terms of difficulty. And after that, it only scales the monster HP, but not very much. Like pit 200 doesn't feel all that different compared to pit 100. And there's 100 tiers in between. So I would actually prefer if, like, you know, the current pit 200 was like 110. And then we just have like, you know, kind of like infinite scaling, like, you know, billions and trillions of life on every single trash monster later on or something. Something that is like completely unreachable, so that we actually have room to grow in the future with power creep coming into the game and so on. So I think that is kind of like a miss here, because T200 is a joke even for some builds. And even with post-nerf builds, you know, I propose a lot of nerfs here later. Even in that scenario, we will absolutely speed farm tier to 100 dungeons. So yeah, something should change that a little bit to actually keep like the higher end of like, you know, scaling and pushing a bit in the game. There is no extra reward for going really high. There is like not really any crazy loot. There's nothing special. The minimum you have to do to get any item in the game is pit tier 41, which like any trash build can achieve basically. So you're just gonna be slower at farming those materials. And you don't really get that much more of an upgrade. But I think it would be amazing if like, you know, the pit actually had, similar to like old Greater Rifts, infinite scaling, in quotes, so that we cannot reach the end. And there is an actual like kind of a contest of, you know, pushing higher, trying to get to the next tier, and, you know, like giving the blasters something to do basically, instead of just, you know, speed farming tier to 100. Another thing is the revive checkpoints are really weird, so that should be looked at. An immunity bubble would be much appreciated, because it didn't happen just once that I killed the boss and I died to something that was still going on there. So similar to Nightmare Dungeons, we need some immunity. This will be very frustrating otherwise. There's also like some destructible environmental things. I'm not sure if that is intended, because I've seen a few different ones of these. Maybe they are leftovers from like redesigning of the layouts and stuff. Maybe not. But either way, there's one in particular called Soul Shot, which is like some pile of bones or something, and you destroy it, and then it shoots like some skulls at you, and they can just randomly one-shot you if you're not very tanky. So I think this will be very frustrating. This should be looked at maybe. There's other environmental effects that do literally nothing, so I kind of expect that this is either unintended or overtuned. And yeah, the rewards in groups, I talked about this. So you get the same reward split between all the players, and that doesn't make much sense. So this should be bumped up, and similar, the boss rewards for like doing the boss leader bosses should be tuned down with what I explained earlier with like this solo versus group disparity. Then we have the tormented bosses. So some feedback here. Grigor is relatively easy, and they also have some bugged lighting tiles that killed me a few times when I was trying to progress on this fight, so that those bugs need to be fixed at a very minimum. I think in general all of these bosses can kind of like benefit from a bit more base damage, because people seem to kind of go in with like glass cannon builds and just nuke them down before they ever get stacks. And I think it would be cool if like the bosses were at least somewhat threatening without stacks. But currently, like the way this works is that, you know, there are certain mechanics that give you a stack. For example, on Bashan, if you fail the dancing patterns, you get a stack. And well, it's a pretty long fight if you have not incredible DPS. So you have to kind of like dance perfectly for like 5 or 10 minutes straight. And if you get hit by, you know, 2 or 3 of these, the fight is basically over. So this is kind of how that works. And it's similar for Grigor, where like the lightning pillars, they give you a stack if you run into them or get knocked into them or something like that. And well, if you just don't have any stacks, they feel almost like a normal boss, so they're not really threatening. So it would be cool if they just had like more base damage, and the stacks maybe were tuned down a tiny bit, or maybe leave them as they are just to keep the challenge. That's fine as well. Zir, for example, is like a complete joke, because the only way to get a stack on Zir is when you get hit by this massive hug. So he does like some 7-second animation or something, and then hugs. And that is the only way to get a stack in this fight, and everything else is completely trivial, for example. So I think there could be like more sources of the stacks, and again, like higher base damage, and that would be much more interesting. I think Andariel is fine as is. Duriel has the same problem, kind of doesn't hurt you until you get stacks, and the stacks are somewhat easy to avoid. Bashan is fine, but the barrier is a bit too overpowered. It seems like it's like the Butcher case, where if your build doesn't have great single target damage, he makes a barrier, and then, you know, you get through the barrier, and then a few seconds later there's the next barrier, and it's kind of like disproportionately punishing low DPS builds basically. I think the barrier could be tuned down a bit, HP could be tuned up a bit maybe. Beast in the Ice is not even level 200. I guess it's a limitation of the Nightmare Dungeon system, but I really hope we're gonna see a level 200 version of this guy, or at the very minimum just like buff him, you know, specifically, I guess, to make him like same level as the other bosses, because he's by far the easiest, I guess. Lilith, they did a rework here, and it's much easier to dodge skulls now. They're like much smaller and also more visible in phase 2. They also gave Lilith this kind of stacking mechanic where the waves don't one-shot you anymore, and now you can actually tank a few of them throughout the fight. You get these stacks. I think that was fine, but again, like Lilith is like kind of a joke now, because not only does she not one-shot you, but she also gets one-shot in most cases. So I would like to see like way more HP on her, at least, in kind of case it's a little bit of a fight. And yeah, We still have some builds that can kind of like take down these uber bosses with like 1 billion or 2 billion life in like sub 30 seconds. Post nerfs, most of these will probably disappear, but there is still stuff that is not really on a nerf radar, I think, and that, you know, we might not have like fully discovered, fully optimized, and so on. This was just a 1 week PTR, so there will definitely be like incredible boss killer builds that will take these bosses down in at the very maximum a minute. I'm not sure if that is like good. I think it's maybe fine like a minute or so for like the absolute blaster builds, but in general I think the fights are really fun when they are long. So yeah, maybe this should be looked at. And also they give you a resplendent spark for killing one of the bosses in a season, which is cool, and also one for Lilith, which is also cool. But I think it would be way cooler if each of the bosses gave you a spark, so that you actually have to go and, you know, farm up all of these materials, and then you do them maybe even like for a solo kill, for example. That's kind of like the kind of like big reward to look forward to. And then you also get some, you know, you can craft an uber unique, you can always craft 2 uber uniques, for example. That would be pretty amazing. And maybe some other cool stuff like, you know, a cosmetic that you unlock for the rest of the season, or maybe for that character if you have taken down all of the uber bosses solo. That could also be kind of amazing. Now let's talk about tempering here. In general, tempering, I really like the system. It's really fun to actually like put different stats on your items. In general, there's not really that many recipes, that many choices right now, but I totally expect you're gonna see, you know, kind of like legendary aspects every single season. There's gonna be like some new recipes or so being thrown in the mix, and that kind of like, you know, shakes things up a little bit. Some of these are very impactful tempers. There's, for example, all this like skill-specific stuff on the weapons, like chance to cast Bone Spear twice, chance to cast Barrage twice, and these kind of things. So that's kind of fun. There's also other fun stuff like Caltrop Size, traps arm faster. There's stuff like chance to freeze, chance to stun that you can roll as utility. Some of these things are pretty overtuned. In general, all of these temper numbers seem overtuned to me, to be honest. In particular, the extra range affixes, they scale the radius and not actually the extra AoE. Like in Path of Exile, for example, extra area of effect scales the total area, but in D4, it scales the radius, which means that you scale the total area by the square value of that. So if you double the radius, then the extra area covered actually goes up by ×4. And if you triple the radius, it goes up by ×9. So basically you hit the entire screen, you hit even off screen with stuff, and it gets completely wild. Like Hodas are hitting the entire screen, corpse tendrils pull enemies from 2 screens away. It's pretty silly, to be fair. So that needs to be addressed. In general, it seems like all of these numbers are just very high in terms of like, you know, area, chance to cast twice, you know, anything you can put there, even like the crowd control effects. Like you can just put like one of each of the crowd control, like a stun, a freeze, immobilize, a slow, and you can proc everything at once very easily on many builds. And, you know, you omega stagger bosses instantly. There's not really a point in trying to, like, you know, put like a smoke grenade on your bar on the rogue to try to stagger the boss faster or something like that, because you just proc it anyway from your attacks. And, you know, likewise with other classes, with other skills and so on. Like, you just insta-stagger bosses with these kind of things. Some of these things are fine, like dodge, life, resist. Like, this is okay the way it works, I think. But most of the other stuff could probably benefit from like just being tweaked down a bit, because you can also masterwork these stats, you can increase them, and it seems like this was not accounted for really, because of the numbers just seem crazy in some cases. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. Otherwise, I'm kind of happy with the system, and as I mentioned, I hope that we're gonna see more effects, more tempers, maybe a removal of the elemental surge. There's also some stuff that could maybe change categories. One example is the clarity ranks on a druid. Clarity used to be a resource passive, now it's a damage passive, so that needs to go somewhere else. It's still classified as a resource here. There's stuff like the trap stuff on the rogue, that is like a weapon slot, I think. That should absolutely be a utility slot, for example. So some stuff can move around a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of cool. One thing that a lot of people are complaining about, though, is that tempering can break your items. I personally think this is not such a huge deal. So basically, it doesn't mean bricking in the sense that the item is completely unusable, but it means bricking in the sense that you might not get the stat that you want. And well, if you have a weapon and you're playing Bone Spear and you want to temper Bone Spear, chance to cast twice, and you don't get it after 5 attempts, well, at the very minimum, you have to look for a new weapon at some point. So this is basically what happens. And I think that's not really such a downside. I think it's okay, because like kind of the first step in the process, and any other step can be repeated infinitely. So it's kind of okay. You can enchant infinitely, you can masterwork infinitely, and so on. So it's not such a huge deal. It does feel a bit bad if sometimes you just temper and you don't get what you want, Maybe they could make like a very, very high cost to reset the temper attempts. For example, Resplendent Spark. Like if you already have your Ubers, or you don't really want an Uber, then you can actually use those. And you know, if you have like a really, really good base that has like the 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 greater affixes, and you want to hold on to it, then maybe you could use a Spark to reset the temper, or something along those lines. Something very costly, I think would be okay. But on the other hand, it's also fine if there's nothing changes, because ultimately it's not all that hard to get something decent on your tempers, outside of maybe the weapons where you have to hit like a specific stat or something like that. So it's not such a huge deal as some people make it out to be, I think. And I think it's okay that you can also break items and then actually pick up another item from the ground. Another general thing that should be addressed though is also like weapon, and also to some degree the rogues. On Barbarian, we have the weapon tempers, and they have, well, technically like 6 weapons basically, like 2 two-handers, 2 one-handers. So it's kind of crazy how much stuff they can put on their weapons. I think that needs to be addressed. In general, like a lot of people are saying, oh, Barbarians are so overpowered because of the 4 weapons, which, well, can be solved with better balancing in other ways. You know, Paragons can be tuned down, Glyphs can be tuned down, legendary aspects, and so on. There are other ways to balance out the 4 weapons, but for whatever reason, Blizzard is not utilizing those other ways of balancing. So I think that maybe it is time to actually go and change at least like the weapon tempers for Barbs, maybe the Rogues as well, although Rogues are going to be the weakest class most likely. So yeah, kind of a hard call here. But in general, yeah, maybe you can say it's a Rogue thing that they can temper, like, you know, more chance for casting projectiles twice, and it's like, you know, Rogue is like the machine gun class kind of, and other classes, they also have these similar tempers, but they don't get that high value of it. I think that's maybe not only that not that bad, but for Barbarians in particular, they have like crazy stuff, and yeah, this can be like just tuned better basically. Anyway, let's move on to the Masterworking. So I don't really have much complaints here. I kind of like how Masterworking works. I think just that it could be a lot more quality of life. Like the animation is super long, it's unskippable, it's annoying. There's like no +4 button, for example, as well. So like the 4, 8, and 12 are the only ranks where you kind of stop and where you kind of like make decisions. So I'd actually like to have like just a straight up +4 button, for example, as well. Just to like, you know, cut down on the time you spend at the blacksmith, instead of just, you know, like you will masterwork these items over and over and over. At least when you have like endgame gear and a lot of materials, you will stand there at the blacksmith, and currently this takes a lot of time just clicking the button. Yeah, the animation is fun, it looks kind of cool, but maybe they could play the animation while we also see the item and while we can also click on stuff, because right now the animation just blocks everything. So it's some stuff like that. Otherwise, yeah, it's kind of like minor things here, just like quality of life, like also material conversion. You have to individually click on every box there to open the materials. That should just be a straight conversion without the boxes, these kind of things. But otherwise, the system is okay, I think. Then we have uniques. A lot of people are complaining that we don't use that many uniques anymore. I kind of disagree with that. I actually think that's great. So right now we don't put Tibble's Will into every single build. We don't put, you know, like, you know, 7 different uniques into every single build. But instead you actually have to kind of handpick those that work for your build, that are important for your build. And a lot of these kind of, especially armor uniques, actually gained a bunch of value compared to before, because they used to have really bad damage reduction, but now damage reduction is completely gone from items. And now you have like 1 or 2 defensive stats on some of those uniques, and suddenly those are really desirable. It's actually kind of funny. So stuff like Tibble's Will got nerfed, but actually it got buffed pretty much because it has damage reduction to close enemies. Or stuff like Flicker Step has damage reduction. Stuff like, you know, some other uniques, they all have like damage reduction on some armor slots, for example. That actually makes them pretty valuable, because damage reduction is such a highly treasured stat now. The main problem here, I guess, are the weapons. Weapons in general have taken a big hit because the weapon tempers are by far the best that you can get. Plus, in general, you can just get better stats on the new items as well, with the tempering, with the masterworking, with just the stuff that can roll there, the greater affixes and so on. It seems like there could be like some tweaks here, but I don't want to go back to the scenario where everything just has a lot of uniques in the build. So I think uniques should always be like very conscious choices, you know, only if they really fit into the build. And I think it's totally fine if builds don't have a single unique in them. So I think that would be the best case scenario here, because what we had in the past was just like too homogenized, you know, too little variety between builds, and you also can't temper uniques, for example. A lot of people are suggesting you should be able to temper uniques to make them more viable. I fully disagree with that. Tempering should be like a legendary item thing, and maybe there could be something else along the lines of, you know, a bit of a power up for uniques in the future, something like half a tempered affix, but, you know, maybe a different system, who knows, that kind of like allows you to make them a bit more viable or so, or some other cool effects you can put on them. But totally, I think it should totally not go back to what it was with uniques every slot, basically. So I really hope that we're not seeing too many OP buffs here for uniques, but yeah, we'll see. And a lot of people are also saying stuff like Uber uniques are not going to be worth it anymore and so on. Like, this is completely untrue. Like Shaco, Grandfather, all these items are still going to be extremely valuable, extremely powerful, and a lot of other uniques will also be extremely valuable. But yeah, some of them have definitely dropped out a bit of the usability. Now let's talk about some bugs. Not very fast, I guess. Hurricane has some infinite damage bugs. Firebolt can be split multiple times with one shot if you stack the fireballs in the same spot, so that made the firebolt stocks kind of crazy. Boss material drops were out of whack. Sometimes they were not dropping at all. Apparently Steelgrass can like not pull enemies sometimes with a stun temper. We have a Helltide bug with the threat meter. I talked about this with the group strategy. That should probably be looked at, but also if it's triggers right at the end of the Helltide, you can go to the next Helltide, then you get like infinite amount of monsters spawning or something. The Scoundrel Letters bug that I found is kind of funny, where you need to mouse over a target to drop traps. Scoundrel Letters could actually be something kind of usable now in the future, with Inner Sight being relatively good, but this mechanic makes it completely unusable for PC users. And also Victimize has a lot of double dipping going on with damage modifiers. So there's a lot more bugs out there. There's just like some stuff that I put here. I already bug reported a ton of other stuff as well. So I'm just gonna glance over this. And yeah, this is basically here, like just a few important things outside of the ugly list, basically, that should be addressed. Well, and the rest here is just my wish list and the buff and the nerf list. So let's go with that. Since a lot of people are also asking for certain things here. Also, I kind of put this together with my chat a little bit. So for example, a last online indicator for clans would be nice, so people can kick people that are not longer playing, for example. Expand the buff bar would be nice, because you have a lot of buffs these days, we don't see half of them. Better ultimate scaling would be cool. Mostly the problem is there's no ultimate ranks. There is, you know, no scaling through resources and attack speed most of the time. This especially applies to like the damage ultimates, like Rain of Arrows, Cataclysm, etc. They're all kind of a joke, no matter what. And we need some better usability there at some point. Yeah, they can't just buff the baseline, you need to buff the scaling of some sort. Then proper PC UI would be cool. There's a lot of like, you know, optimizations that could be done. Gauntlet could definitely need a bump up, because tier 100 dungeons are probably easier than tier 70 dungeons in season 3 now. So the Gauntlet is going to be like kind of like ridiculous. Eaglehorn is just like a random request for me. I would like to see that being like a viable like single target option for pinch shot. Yeah, I'm not going to detail it now, but it could do something else that actually helps the main weakness of pinch shot instead of doing, well, not really much. Then my season 5 wish list. So I know a lot of the stuff that I request here will not make it into season 4. I don't expect like a major turnaround, a major new feature or something like that. We're just a month away from the season, so everything is kind of locked in here in terms of like the features. But yeah, what I would like to see in the future, and a lot of other people, is loadouts like D3. I guess now with the codex rework, there is definitely, you know, a way forward for this, because aspects are infinite now, basically. So maybe have like, you know, a one-time unlock cost for a slot in the loadouts, and then you can just really swap to it or something. Or every time you save a build, you pay a fee, and then you can swap to it or something like that. That would be cool. Multi 5, I talked about this. That should happen hopefully very, very soon, because you're going to see that very clearly in season 4 with like how overpowered we're going to be on all of the builds. You know, Helltide and Vashan farming and all that stuff is going to be relatively boring. It's already a major problem before, and it just keeps getting worse with outdoor content being trivial. So I would like to see something there. API for profiles, etc. would be cool. Private leagues like in PoE would be cool. I would really love to host like races, events, and community stuff, and, you know, have really cool things to do. Even with like hard mode options, like, you know, monsters are stronger, tankier, faster, more lead affixes. I don't know, tons of stuff that you could do there. And it could also be stuff like no imprinting, for example, right? like making kind of races like this would be like really great for the community. I would love to host stuff like this basically all the time, but we just cannot because we don't have, you know, either this or both to even make something like this happen without like ridiculous amounts of moderation work and ridiculous rule sets and stuff like that. So I really hope we're gonna see that in the future. Communities in like in D3 would be amazing. So we can have like, you know, trading communities, you know, boss rotation communities, just grouping communities in general. There's no LFG features yet. A lot of people are requesting that. I think communities do that job pretty well. I'm not sure why they're not included yet in the game. I would really like to see Malphas come back in some way. Shadow Clone fix at some point. Strongholds, I would like to see some reason to do them again, or do them like at a high difficulty. I think there is a lot of potential for strongholds, and maybe they can come up with some cool ideas here. Yeah, white, blue, yellow items. People are complaining that now they're completely useless. Well, I agree they are useless, but that was kind of like the whole point of this itemization rework. So you don't pick up a billion items every run, but now there's really no reason to use them at all. Maybe long term there could be something like, you know, another crafting system where you can take like a white base item and then maybe craft something else that they cannot find as a drop, for example, or something like that, but make it like really rare, something like really end game, really difficult to achieve or something, so that we don't pick up like a billion items. Gems, I talked about these, they're kind of like oof. And then we have also something that I would like to see, like a roguelite mode, like, you know, Torghast, or like Hades, or, you know, something like that. I think it would be amazing. This mega dungeon that, you know, potentially takes hours and hours for like a single run if you go all the way. Maybe that you can actually, you know, stop and then, you know, come back at another day or something. It could be really cool if there's like, you know, some random stuff happening in that run, and every run is different because of different power-ups, different levels or whatever. Could be really cool. And I talked about world bosses. Tormented world bosses would be amazing as well. Now, for the buff list, Great Rogue is still very undertuned. No Witness Legendary Note for Rogues is a joke. Call of the Ancients, I tried to make like a pet barb. It seemed pretty awful. The only thing that kind of did some damage there was like the Leap Quake together with this. But yeah, Ancestor Echo seems to have some bugs. And in general, it seems extremely weak compared to other barb builds. Dual core builds in general could need a bump because the core skill ranks, for example, they can roll on gloves is a lower value than the individual ranks. I think it would be cool if that was just the same, and this is just like, you know, this is like the roll, you know, you get lucky, you get core skill ranks, and you can work it in any build, even for single core builds. You can use it on different builds, for example. That would be cool. I don't see a reason to make this a lower value and just punish double core builds. They're already struggling to kind of like, you know, even exist at this point. Especially like on rogues. I guess this was the double core class, but there are certain cases on other classes where this could be a thing if there was a bit more support for it. Inner Sight is really weak in higher end content because it just doesn't fill the gauge at all. So this should be maybe normalized a little bit because it scales with the monster HP. So if you go to Pit 200, if you go to Torment bosses, you just don't proc Inner Sight. That's a bit of a problem. Then we have Druid Companions. I think they're generally okay now in terms of output, but the survivability is terrible. Like, they just keep dying all the time, especially on the boss fights. They need some tweaking there. I talked about ultimates. Bloodlands seems like it has like a really crappy hampering affix, so that is something on the Necros that could need some love. Rabies is like an early game thing, and that's it. So this kind of plays into the companion stuff as well. You have like this companion rabies synergy, but not really, because rabies is just terrible. Some like dots in general are like harder to scale than crit builds, for example, so there needs to be something here. Chain lightning seems to be undertuned. Charge bolts, like the lightning sword builds outside of like arc lash, ball lightning basically. Whirlwind could need some love. Rain of Arrows, even with like insane tempo affixes, suffers from this like ultimate scaling problem that I talked about. Maybe we leave it as it is for now, and then, you know, instead of giving like plus 300% per item on Rain of Arrows, maybe we're gonna do some other cool stuff for scaling in the future for all ultimates. That would be nice. Shred could need some love, and also like some aspects. For example, there's like a new concussive aspect that dazes enemies. That is basically the same thing as the Manglers. I think that could be combined as just kind of clutter or something. But yeah. And for the nerf list, we have the Frozen Orbs here. So they're really powerful. I actually played them right at the end of the PTR, and it felt like I was just turned on the cheat mode and I was just blasting through the pits. Like no trouble, no danger, everything is frozen. everything dies instantly. I throw a few frozen orbs, and then like the conjurations just kind of like kept doing its thing and shot more and just killed the pack while I was running away. Seems overtuned as hell, basically. And that's not even like the best build, not even close to the best build in the game, actually. Like, Frozen Orb probably doesn't even make it into the top 10 right now. So this is how crazy it is, and also how crazy some other builds are. But yeah, some of these, like, you know, other top 10 builds are also based on either bugs that I expect fixed, or stuff like the Elemental Surge that I also expect to be either nerfed or removed, and some other stuff like that, or some buff stuff that I also expect to get tuned down or fixed, like Dust Devils. So yeah, in general, I think like some of the top end builds need to be brought down a little bit from what they are on the PTR right now. In general, even though I'm advocating for a lot of nerfs, like everyone is going to feel a lot stronger in Season 4, so keep that in mind. Like, even if they nerf these builds now to a more reasonable level, they will be way stronger than anything we've seen ever in the game, pretty much. And a lot of builds will be way stronger than they have ever been in the past as well. So just saying that here before, you know, the pitchforks come out. Blizzard definitely seems overtuned now as well. It seems very powerful, decimates everything because of the new scaling of the weapons now for these aspects. So that should be looked at maybe. Thunderstruck Druid Legendary Paragon Node is overtuned as well, because you can get ridiculous amounts of close or distant damage from Tempering. You can get like a, I know, 150%, 200% multiplier from that Legendary Node alone. It's kind of crazy. Frosty Strides is like a utility aspect, but it's like also completely annihilating the entire game on a Sorg, for example, where you can reset, evade cooldown really fast, and then like teleport around and stuff like that. It's crazy. I think Juggernaut aspect needs a bit of tuning down as well. Juggernaut gives you like 10,000 armor. It basically gives you all the armor you could ever need in a game on a single aspect, on a normal slot, not even an amulet. And it's basically so efficient to use Juggernaut over anything else that could give you armor that it is not even a question. Like, you always put Juggernaut in your build, basically, outside of maybe some cases on a Sorg with like teleport enchant. But yeah, Juggernaut is, for some reason, it just got doubled in value without even being in the patch notes. Maybe that's even a bug, but either way, Juggernaut seems too crazy like this. Yeah, and some other like aspects here, like I talked about this, but also there's like some utility aspects that are kind of like damage aspects in disguise, like especially rogues here, Frostbitten, Noxious Eyes. You can put them on the boots, and these days you don't really care about mobility aspects anymore. Everyone will have insane amounts of movement speed basically by default, or just go at movement speed cap by default, basically just some like the new tempering affixes with movement speed and so on, and the greater affixes that they can roll, and the masterworking and so on. So you have a lot of movement speed, mobility aspects are out, and you use these kind of things now, and then that's just basically another offensive aspect on your boots. So this stuff should probably just become like offensive at this point. There's also Debilitating Roar, to some degree Challenging Shout, that are too much like day and night when they're up and down, like 70% damage reduction from Debilitating Roar. Like, a lot of endgame Druid builds really rely on that, and it's kind of like you are an invincible tank when it's up, and you get blasted when it's down. I think that could be like, you know, streamlined a little bit, especially because Debilitating Roar is going to be included in basically every high-end Druid build, and in most cases even combined with the Hunter's Zenith Ring that allows you to reset the cooldown of Debilitating Roar, so you have it kind of like permanently up, and sometimes you do a mistake and it's not up, and then yeah, it kind of feels bad. So maybe the baseline Druid defense could be bumped a little bit up, and the Debilitating Roar could be bumped a little bit down to like 50 or maybe 40%, similar to Challenging Shout. So it's not like this insane just face tank kind of everything scenario when it's up. And yeah, similar for Challenging Shout, like in general, it seems like Blizzard has been trying to tune down the defenses, which is very good. This is very needed to kind of like have like a baseline of difficulty in a game and make, you know, fights challenging, make attacks threatening and so on, which was not really the case at all in the previous seasons. But now in Season 4, like, defense matters, your defensive choice matters, and I think Challenging Shout is also too overpowered here, because you just press the button and it's damage reduction on the player, it's not damage reduction on the enemy, like Debilitating Roar, for example. This doesn't apply to the shadow bosses in the pit, for example, so those can still one-shot you with Debilitating Roar, but Challenging Shout will protect you no matter what. So Challenging Shout just could probably also benefit from like a bit of a bump down, maybe to like 30% or something like that, to make the barbs not like ridiculous in the pit. And Ebon Piercer, there might be some bugs, this might be in the bug list, but either way, Ebon Piercer, the new blight stuff for Necros, is completely busted. I'm also kind of inclined to maybe mention minions here. I mean, minions have been down bad ever since the game came out, and they have received buff after buff after buff, and they became from like unplayable to kind of usable, and now they're like ridiculous. And especially in a scenario where a lot of the other top builds are most likely getting tuned down, like Frozen Orb, Dust Devils, a lot of Barb stuff, maybe some Druid stuff like a Tornado. In that case, minions will rule supreme, and I think that is also a problem. You know, it's not like I don't want minions to be good, even though I'm not a minion enjoyer. You know, I don't really care about minions, but I think it's a problem if like kind of like the best builds in the game are kind of like the laziest, basically. Like you can literally just like AFK on a minion necro, and a major issue that the minion necros have is the AI. And a lot of people are complaining about the AI of minions. And if those ever get better at doing what they're supposed to do, then they could definitely need nerfs. Maybe right now it's fine that they're overtuned because they're so dumb, but whenever the AI improves, they will definitely need a nerf at least. But yeah, this is it for my feedback video here. So this is the entire document. I'll have this linked in the description as well. There's a lot of stuff I went over now, a lot of opinions. We also had a podcast. We talked with Rax and Crip and Macro, for example, about a lot of these topics and more. And in general, I'm gonna have a lot more videos coming out for the PTR, for individual builds I tested, for stuff I've done, the Helltide, the leveling. So the next like 3 weeks or so, I have enough things to put out there for you guys to like, you know, learn more about the details. But this is kind of like the big overview, the big feedback here that I want to give. Let's hope that Blizzard is taking it to heart, and not just mine, but also other people made a lot of really good points, a lot of good suggestions. But here's just like, you know, a lot of stuff that I found problematic that I would like to see improved. But even if, let's say, Season 4 goes live with no changes at all, I think a lot of people will love it. However, I think it's kind of bad for the game if you get stuff like the Dust Devils, if you get stuff like the Frosty Strides, if you get stuff like, you know, the Frozen Orb, for example. Like some stuff is just really out of whack, way overtuned, and we kind of like set the bar too high for builds to be considered good in the future. And it will trivialize the game too much in the high end where there's supposed to be a challenge. Right now, there's not going to be a challenge if you play any of those builds. And we're kind of back to Season 3 where everything's a joke. But yeah, let's hope that stuff is going to change a bit balance-wise, a bit of quality of life-wise. Let's see what happens. I'm definitely going to keep you guys updated with, you know, whenever the patch notes come out. And, you know, of course, the maximal builds, my build guides. There's a lot of stuff I want to do. And I really like that we had this PTR. I appreciate Blizzard for making this PTR so that we get to test it, that we get to try it early. And also now I actually have, you know, time, I guess. Instead of like 4 days to make all of the guides, now we actually have 4 weeks. And that's kind of amazing. So stay tuned for more stuff coming out soon, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think about it, where I was really off, or what I forgot, or something else you would like to see in the patch that I maybe can pass on as last minute feedback or something like that. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.